D-Day was not just another battle. It was the day the future of Europe and the free world was decided. On June 6, 1944, thousands of young soldiers crossed the English Channel, knowing many of them would never return. This was the largest military invasion in human history. This was D-Day. Imagine waking up before dawn, the air thick with the smell of salt and diesel, the roar of engines drowning out your own thoughts. You're on a boat, packed shoulder to shoulder with other young men, all staring at a distant shore you've only seen on maps. This isn't a movie. This was the reality for over 150,000 Allied soldiers. Their mission was simple to state, but terrifying to execute. Land in Normandy, breach Hitler's Atlantic Wall, and begin the liberation of Europe. The stakes couldn't have been higher. This was a moment that would define a generation and shape the course of history for decades to come. By 1944, Nazi Germany's shadow had fallen across most of Europe. France, a beacon of liberty, had fallen. The Netherlands, Belgium, Denmark, Norway all were under occupation. Millions lived under the brutal rule of the Third Reich, and the Soviet Union was bearing the brunt of the German war machine on the Eastern Front. The Allies led by the United States, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union knew one simple, hard truth. To defeat Hitler, they had to open a new front. They had to invade Western Europe and take the fight directly to German-occupied territory. An invasion from the sea was the only way, but it was an incredible risk. The Atlantic Wall, a line of German coastal defenses stretching for thousands of miles, was formidable. Failure wasn't just an option, it was a terrifying possibility. A failed invasion would mean catastrophic losses, a devastating blow to Allied morale, and potentially years more of war. Success, however, could be the key to unlocking victory. It was an all-or-nothing gamble, and the fate of the world hung in the balance. The grand plan was codenamed Operation Overlord. It was the most complex and ambitious military operation ever conceived. It involved the combined might of soldiers, sailors, and airmen from the United States, Britain, Canada, and several other Allied nations, including Poland, France, and Norway. Over 156,000 troops were set to land on the first day, supported by a massive armada of nearly 7,000 ships and over 11,000 aircraft. The sheer scale was breathtaking. But strength alone wasn't enough. Surprise was the crucial element. Secrecy was paramount. To keep the Germans guessing, the Allies launched an ingenious deception campaign called Operation Fortitude. They created a phantom army, complete with inflatable tanks, fake radio traffic, and a famous general, George Sampaton, placed in command. The goal was to convince the Germans that the main invasion would strike at the Pas-de-Calais, the narrowest point of the English Channel. The ruse worked brilliantly. When the real invasion force set sail for Normandy, German commanders were still anticipating an attack hundreds of miles away. Then there were Gold, Juno, and Sword, targeted by the British and Canadian troops. Each beach presented its own unique set of challenges, from terrain to the strength of German defenses. As dawn broke on June 6, the landing craft approached the shore. The moment the ramps dropped, the idyllic French coastline transformed into a maelstrom of chaos and death. Hidden mines lurked beneath the sand and in the water. Of all the landing zones, Omaha Beach became a name synonymous with hell on earth. The American forces landing there faced a nightmare scenario. Intelligence had severely underestimated the German defenses. The elite German 352nd Infantry Division was in place, ready and waiting. Pre-landing naval and aerial bombardments had been largely ineffective, leaving the heavily fortified bluffs and bunkers untouched. As the first waves of American soldiers from the 1st and 29th Infantry Divisions hit the sand, they were cut down in droves. Landing craft were hit, men drowned under the weight of their equipment, and those who made it ashore found themselves pinned down with no cover. The waves turned red with blood. Officers were killed, units were shattered and scattered, and for a terrifying few hours, it seemed the landing might fail. But amidst the horror, small acts of incredible bravery turned the tide. Leaderless groups of soldiers, driven by sheer grit and determination, began to push forward, inch by inch, blasting their way through obstacles and taking German bunkers one at a time. Against all odds, by the end of the day, a fragile foothold had been secured on Omaha Beach. By the end of that long, bloody day, the Allies had achieved the impossible. Despite horrific losses, particularly at Omaha, they had successfully landed tens of thousands of troops on all 5 beaches. The Atlantic Wall, Hitler's supposedly impenetrable fortress, had been breached. The Germans, caught by surprise and slow to react, had failed to coordinate a decisive counterattack to push the invaders back into the sea. Their chance was lost. The foothold was secure. D-Day was no longer a gamble. It was a breakthrough. The airdrops of paratroopers behind enemy lines had also succeeded in sowing confusion and securing vital bridges and crossroads, preventing German reinforcements from reaching the coast. The largest amphibious invasion in history had succeeded. A new front had been opened in Western Europe, and the tide of the war had decisively turned in favor of the Allies. The road to liberation was now open, but this monumental victory came at an enormous cost. The price was paid in blood. On June 6th alone, over 4,400 Allied soldiers were killed, with thousands more wounded or missing. At Omaha Beach, American casualties were the highest, numbering around 2,400, but every beach had its stories of sacrifice. Many of the fallen were just teenagers, boys who had left farms in Kansas, factories in Manchester, and small towns in Quebec, only to die on a foreign shore. They were sons, brothers, and husbands who would never see their families again. Each one represented a future cut short, yet their sacrifice was not in vain. It was their courage that cracked open the door to Nazi-occupied Europe. Their bravery on the beaches of Normandy paved the road to the liberation of Paris and, eventually, the final push to Berlin. The cost was staggering, but it purchased the freedom of a continent. D-Day marked the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany in the West. With a secure beachhead established, the Allies could now pour in millions of soldiers and endless supplies to fuel the advance across France. The war was far from over. Brutal battles, like the Battle of the Bulge, still lay ahead, but the final outcome was no longer in doubt. Less than a year after the landings at Normandy, on May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered, and World War II in Europe was over. Without D-Day, history would have taken a very different, darker path. Europe might have remained under Nazi tyranny for years longer, or been entirely liberated by the Soviet Union, reshaping the post-war world in a completely different way. D-Day ensured the restoration of democracy in Western Europe and solidified the transatlantic alliance that would define the second half of the 20th century. It was a day that truly changed everything. The story of D-Day is more than just a battle. It's a powerful reminder that freedom is never free. It's a legacy that was earned with immense courage and sacrifice on the beaches of Normandy. It was a day when ordinary, pitiful young men from all walks of life were called upon to do something truly extraordinary. They faced down tyranny and gave their today for our tomorrow. This was the day that changed history forever. Thank you for watching. If you want to learn more about the real stories that shaped our world, make sure to subscribe to our channel. We'll see you in the next video.